At 11:30 on a Tuesday morning, I knocked on the door of my own house in Maplewood Heights, the one I'd been paying the mortgage on for 3 years while living with my sister. A young woman with honey blonde hair answered, wearing my silk robe, holding my favorite coffee mug. She smiled warmly and asked, "Can I help you?" I should have screamed, should have demanded answers, should have called my husband right there. Instead, I smiled back sweetly and said, "Hi, I'm looking for the Henderson family. I think I have the wrong address." What she didn't know was that I'd been planning this moment for weeks, and what my husband Trevor didn't know was that his perfect little secret was about to become his worst nightmare. Hold up. I'm curious where you're listening from, and if this story spoke to you, make sure you're subscribed. Trust me, what I have planned for tomorrow is going to blow you away. Let me back up. 3 years ago, Trevor and I bought our dream home on Rosewood Lane in Maplewood Heights. A beautiful two-story colonial with white shutters, a wraparound porch, and the kind of picket fence you see in movies. We were so happy, so in love, planning our future in every room. Then Trevor's job required him to relocate to Riverside City for a temporary assignment. Just 6 months, he said, maybe a year at most. "Babe, you love your job at the design firm here in Clearwater. Stay with your sister Riley for now. I'll rent a small apartment in Riverside, and we'll keep the house for when I come back on weekends." It seemed reasonable. I trusted him completely. The weekend's visits started strong. Every Friday evening, Trevor would drive the 3 hours from Riverside to Maplewood Heights. We'd spend blissful weekends together, working in the garden, cooking elaborate meals, making plans for when he'd finally come home for good. But slowly, the visits became less frequent. First, he'd miss a weekend due to work, then 2 weekends in a row. Then he'd show up late Sunday and leave early Monday morning. "The project is more complex than we thought," he'd explain, looking tired and stressed. "But I'm making great money, honey. This will set us up for years." I believed him. God, I was so naive. The first red flag came 6 months ago when I decided to surprise him with a visit to our house. I'd been staying with my sister Riley in downtown Clearwater, about 40 minutes away from our place. I missed our home terribly and thought I'd spend the weekend there, maybe prepare a romantic dinner for when Trevor came back from Riverside. When I pulled into our driveway, I noticed something odd. The garden looked maintained, too maintained. Trevor was not much of a gardener, and I hadn't been there in weeks. Fresh flowers lined the walkway, flowers I didn't plant. The porch furniture had new cushions in colors I'd never seen before. Unfamiliar toiletries in my bathroom. The bed was made with sheets I'd never purchased. My hands shook as I walked through what should have been my sanctuary. This wasn't just Trevor staying here occasionally. Someone else was living in my house. A woman was living in my house. I could have confronted him immediately, could have called and demanded explanations. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the careful way everything was arranged, like they were playing house in my absence. Maybe it was the realization that the temporary assignment had been going on for almost 2 years now, with no end in sight. Or maybe it was the gut instinct that told me this ran deeper than I wanted to admit. Instead, I quietly left and drove back to Riley's apartment in silence. I didn't tell her what I discovered. Not yet. I needed to think, to plan, to figure out exactly what I was dealing with. Over the next few weeks, I started paying attention to details I'd previously ignored. Trevor's phone calls came at odd hours, always when he was just leaving the office or heading to dinner with colleagues. His weekend visits became even more sporadic, and when he did show up, he seemed distracted, constantly checking his phone. I started doing research, simple internet searches about our address, checking social media for any mentions of our street. That's when I found her Instagram account. Autumn Sinclair, 26 years old, worked as a yoga instructor in Maplewood Heights. Her feed was full of photos that made my blood run cold. Pictures of her morning coffee taken in my kitchen, sunset shots from her porch that was actually my porch, selfies in her favorite robe that I recognized as the silk one I had left behind. The captions were what really got me. "Home sweet home," and "grateful for this peaceful sanctuary," and "love starting my mornings here." She was broadcasting her life in my house to her 2,000 followers like it was the most natural thing in the world. But the post that nearly made me throw my phone across the room was from 2 weeks ago.
A picture of her hand wearing a ring, not a wedding ring, but a promise ring, with the caption, "Sometimes the best things come when you least expect them. Patience pays off." The ring was sitting on my kitchen counter, in my house, the house I was still paying mortgage on while living in my sister's cramped guest room. I screenshotted everything. Every post, every story, every tagged location. I started a folder on my phone labeled evidence, though I wasn't sure yet what I planned to do with it. That's when I decided to take matters into my own hands. I called in sick to work and made the drive to Maplewood Heights on a Tuesday morning, knowing Trevor thought I'd be safely at my desk at the design firm in Clearwater. I parked 2 streets over and walked through the neighborhood I used to call home, approaching my house like a stranger. My heart pounded as I climbed the steps to my own front porch. I could hear music playing inside, something light and acoustic that I didn't recognize. Through the window, I glimpsed movement in the kitchen. Someone was home, all right. I raised my hand and knocked on my own door. When Autumn Sinclair answered in my robe, holding my mug, standing in my doorway, I felt a surge of rage so powerful I thought I might faint. But instead of exploding, something cold and calculating clicked into place in my mind. She looked exactly like her photos, pretty in that effortless way some young women manage, with clear skin and bright eyes. She was everything I wasn't. Younger, more carefree, unburdened by years of marriage and compromise. "Can I help you?" she asked, tilting her head with genuine friendliness. And that's when I made the decision that would change everything. Instead of revealing who I was, instead of demanding to know what she was doing in my house, I smiled my sweetest smile and lied through my teeth. "Hi there! I'm so sorry to bother you, but I'm looking for the Henderson family. I think I might have gotten the wrong address." She looked confused but helpful. "Oh, no, this is the Sinclair residence." "Well, actually," she laughed, "it's my boyfriend's house, but I've been staying here." The Hendersons. I don't think I know any Hendersons in the neighborhood. The Sinclair residence. Her boyfriend's house. I felt something break inside me, but I kept smiling. "Oh, silly me. I must have mixed up the addresses. Thank you so much and sorry to disturb you." "No problem at all," she said brightly. "Have a great day." As she closed the door, I heard her call out, "Honey, someone was looking for the Hendersons. Do we know any?" And then the door shut completely. Honey. She was talking to someone inside. My husband was supposed to be 3 hours away in Riverside City. I walked calmly back to my car, my mind racing with possibilities. But one thing was crystal clear. Trevor and Autumn thought they were living in a perfect little bubble, completely safe from discovery. They had no idea that I'd found them out. And they definitely had no idea what I was planning to do about it. We poured our hearts into researching and telling the story. If you're hooked, show some love with a subscribe. Now, where were we? I sat in my car 2 blocks away from my own house, hands trembling as I processed what I just witnessed. Autumn Sinclair wasn't just staying in my home, she was living there like she owned it, and someone else was inside with her. The pieces were falling into place, but I needed proof, real, undeniable proof. Instead of driving straight to Riley's apartment to cry and rage like my emotions demanded, I did something Trevor would never expect from his trusting, naive wife. I got strategic. My first call was to Natasha Brooks, my college roommate who'd become one of the city's top divorce attorneys. We hadn't spoken in months, but she picked up on the second ring. "Nat, it's me. I need your help, and I need you to keep this completely confidential." "What's going on, honey?" She shifted immediately to professional concern. I told her everything. The house, Autumn, the Instagram posts, Trevor's lies about Riverside City. Natasha listened without interrupting, occasionally making small notes I could hear through the phone.
My second call was to Cameron West, the PI Natasha recommended. His voice was gravelly but reassuring. Mrs.? Just call me Sarah for now. I wasn't ready to give my real name until I knew I could trust him. All right, Sarah. I understand you need surveillance on a cheating spouse. It's more complicated than that. He's been lying about where he lives and works. I think he's been running a double life. How long has this been going on? Almost 2 years, maybe longer. Cameron whistled low. That's not just cheating, that's fraud. If he's been lying about employment, residence, finances, we could be looking at multiple criminal charges. When do you want to start? Today. I gave him Trevor's supposed work address in Riverside City, our home address in Maplewood Heights, and Autumn's information. Within 3 hours, Cameron called back. Sarah, we've got a problem. The address your husband gave you for his work? It's a UPS store. He's been using it as a mail forwarding service. My stomach dropped. What does that mean? It means he never moved to Riverside for work. He's been living in your house the whole time, letting you pay the bills while he plays house with his girlfriend. This isn't just adultery. It's fraud, identity theft, if he's been using your credit, and potentially theft of services. The betrayal cut even deeper than I'd imagined. While I'd been lonely and missing him, sleeping on Riley's couch and eating ramen noodles to afford the mortgage payments, Trevor had been living his best life in our dream home with another woman. There's more, Cameron continued. I did some digging on Autumn Sinclair. She's not just a yoga instructor. She's been posting sponsored content on her Instagram using your house as the backdrop. She's literally making money off of living in your house. I had to pull over. The rage was so intense, I couldn't see straight. How much money? From what I can estimate based on her follower count and the brand she's partnered with, probably $3,000 to $5,000 in a month. She's built her entire influencer brand around the lifestyle she's living in your house. That night, I called in sick for the rest of the week and began the most intensive investigation of my life. I created fake social media accounts to follow Autumn and her friends. I researched Trevor's supposed employer in Riverside, which did exist, but had never heard of him when I called pretending to be from a survey company. I discovered Trevor had been using our joint credit card for purchases in Maplewood Heights while telling me he was in Riverside. Groceries, restaurants, even a monthly membership to the local country club, all paid for with money from our shared account while I'd been scrapping together rent money for Riley. But the most damning evidence came when I decided to return to the house for a more thorough investigation. I waited until Thursday afternoon when Autumn's Instagram stories showed her at a yoga class across town. I used my key to enter my own home, feeling like a burglar in my own space. The house had been completely redecorated. Our wedding photos were gone, replaced with pictures of Trevor and Autumn hiking, at restaurants, on what looked like vacation trips I'd never heard about. My clothes had been moved out of the master bedroom closet to make room for Autumn's extensive wardrobe. Even my grandmother's antique jewelry box had been relocated to a guest room, while Autumn's jewelry was displayed prominently on my vanity. In Trevor's nightstand, the same nightstand where he used to keep his watch and wallet when we lived together, I found something that made my blood run cold. A small velvet ring box. Inside was an engagement ring. Not the promise ring I'd seen in Autumn's Instagram post, but a real engagement ring with a diamond that cost more than I made in 3 months. The receipt was tucked underneath, dated just 2 weeks ago. $15,000 charged to our joint credit card, the same credit card I'd been using to buy groceries and pay bills while living at Riley's.
Trevor was planning to propose to his mistress using my money in my house after lying to me for 2 years. I photographed everything: the ring, the receipt, the redecorated rooms, the bills and mail stacked on the kitchen counter, all addressed to Trevor at this address, proving he'd been living here permanently. I found lease agreements for a storage unit where he'd apparently moved all of my belongings to make room for Autumn's things. But the piece of evidence that would prove most valuable was Trevor's laptop, sitting open on the kitchen counter. He was still logged into his email, and I couldn't resist scrolling through. What I found was a gold mine. Emails between Trevor and Autumn dating back 2.5 years, 6 months before he'd even told me about the temporary assignment. Messages about how they'd have to be careful until he figured out how to break it to Sarah gently. Plans for redecorating their house. And most damning of all, emails to real estate agents about putting the house on the market without my knowledge. Trevor wasn't just living at double life. He was planning to sell our house and disappear with Autumn, leaving me with nothing.
I forwarded the most incriminating emails to a secure account I'd created specifically for this evidence. Then I did something that would later prove to be genius. I used Trevor's computer to schedule automatic monthly transfers from his personal checking account to mine, dating back 6 months. If he was going to steal from me, I was going to steal it back. By the time I left the house that day, I had enough evidence to destroy Trevor's entire world. But I wasn't ready to strike yet. Cameron was still gathering information about Trevor's real job situation, and Natasha was preparing the legal paperwork that would ensure I got everything I was entitled to, and then some. That evening, when Trevor called for our usual check-in, I answered cheerfully. "Hey, babe, how was work?" "Oh, same old stuff. Really busy project timeline. I might not be able to make it home this weekend." "That's okay," I said sweetly. "I understand. Work comes first. You're the best, Sarah. I love you." "I love you too," I lied. After I hung up, I texted Cameron and Natasha in our group chat. Phase 1 complete, time for Phase 2. What Trevor and Autumn didn't know was that their perfect little love nest was about to become ground zero for the most public humiliation of their lives. I'd spent 2 years being the understanding wife, the patient partner, the woman who sacrificed her happiness for his career. Now it was time for them to meet the woman I'd become in their absence. Someone who didn't just get mad. Someone who got even. The plan came together on a Friday afternoon when Autumn posted an Instagram story that made my heart race with anticipation. "Girls' night tonight, wine tasting at Rosewood Country Club with my favorites. Wine and shine emoji. #blessed. #girls' night." Perfect. She'd be gone for hours, and Trevor would be alone in my house. I called Natasha. "It's time." "Are you sure you're ready for this? Once we start, there's no going back." I've never been more ready for anything in my life. Saturday morning at 10 a.m., I drove to Maplewood Heights. Not alone this time, but with a carefully assembled audience. Natasha sat in the passenger seat, her briefcase full of legal documents. Cameron followed in his own car with professional recording equipment. Behind him, my sister Riley drove our parents, whom I finally told everything the night before. Mom had cried. Dad had gone silent in that dangerous way that meant someone was about to face his wrath. But the most important passenger was in my backseat, Detective Lisa Hartwell from Maplewood Heights Police Department, whom Cameron had contacted about Trevor's fraudulent activities. She'd agreed to observe the confrontation to ensure everything was documented properly for potential criminal charges. I'd spent hours the night before crafting the perfect trap. I knew Trevor was home alone. Cameron had been watching the house since 6 a.m. I also knew that at 10:15 a.m., Autumn would be teaching her Saturday morning yoga class at Serenity Studios because she'd posted about it all week. We parked across the street, and I took a deep breath. "Everyone remember the plan?" Natasha nodded. "You go in first, alone, have the conversation. We'll be recording everything from out here, and Detective Hartwell will intervene if needed." I walked up to my own front door and used my key.
Trevor was in the kitchen making breakfast using the expensive organic ingredients I'd seen charged to our credit card. He looked up in shock when I entered. "Sarah, what are you doing here? I thought you were working today." "I decided to take a personal day," I said calmly, setting my purse on the counter. "We need to talk." His face went pale. He was wearing a robe I'd never seen before, expensive silk that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "Talk about what?" "About Riverside City. About your job. About how I've been paying the mortgage on this house while you've been living here with it." I watched him try to formulate a lie, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. Finally, "I can explain." "I'm sure you can, but first, let me ask you something. Who's Autumn Sinclair?" The blood drained from his face completely. How do you know about her?" "Oh, Trevor, I know everything." I pulled up my phone and began scrolling through screenshots. I know about her Instagram account where she posts from my house. I know about the $15,000 engagement ring you bought her with my money. I know about the emails where you called me naive and discussed how to break it to Sarah gently. Trevor sat down heavily in one of my kitchen chairs. "Sarah, please let me explain. It's not what you think." "Really? Because I think you've been lying to me for 2.5 years. I think you never moved to Riverside for work. I think you moved your girlfriend into our house while making me pay the bills for my sister's guest room. I think you were planning to propose to her and sell this house without telling me. Am I wrong about any of that?" Trevor's hands were shaking. "I never meant for it to happen this way."
But it did happen this way. You made it happen this way. I moved closer to him. "Tell me, Trevor, when you've been eating dinner at that dining room table with her, do you ever think about me eating ramen noodles on Riley's couch? When you've been sleeping in our bed with her, do you ever remember that I've been sleeping alone for 2 years? Sarah, I love you. I never stopped loving you." "Stop." My voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "Don't you dare. If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. If you loved me, you wouldn't have stolen from me. If you loved me, you wouldn't have made me feel crazy for missing my own husband while he was playing house with another woman." That's when I heard it. A car door slamming outside, then another, and another. Trevor heard it too. "Sarah, who did you bring here?" "The people who are going to make sure you face consequences for what you've done." The front door opened, and Natasha walked in first, her heels clicking authoritatively on the hardwood floors. Behind her came Detective Hartwell, her badge clearly visible. Then my parents, Riley, and Cameron with his recording equipment. Trevor stood up so fast he knocked over his chair. "What the hell is this?" "This," said Natasha, opening her briefcase, "is the reckoning you've been avoiding for 2.5 years." Detective Hartwell stepped forward. "Mr. Trevor Mason, I'm Detective Lisa Hartwell with Maplewood Heights PD. We need to discuss some irregularities in your financial activities and residence claims." I don't understand. Sarah, what did you tell them?" "The truth," I said simply. "Something you seem to have forgotten how to do." My father, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. His voice was deadly quiet. "Son, I want you to look at me." Trevor reluctantly met Dad's eyes. "For 2 years, I watched my daughter cry herself to sleep on her sister's couch because she missed her husband. For 2 years, she scraped together money to pay for this house while eating nothing but pasta and peanut butter sandwiches. Do you have any idea what that did to us as parents? Watching our child suffer while her husband was living it up with another woman?" Trevor opened his mouth, but Mom cut him off. "We opened our home to Sarah when you abandoned her. We held her when she cried about missing you. We listened to her make excuses for why you couldn't visit, why you were too busy, why work was so demanding." Mom's voice was shaking with fury. "And the whole time you were here, playing house, spending her money on another woman?"
Natasha pulled out a thick folder. Trevor, these are the divorce papers. But before we discuss settlement terms, Detective Hartwell has some questions about the fraudulent credit card usage, the false address claims, and the identity theft charges. Identity theft? Trevor's voice cracked. Cameron stepped forward with his tablet. You've been using your wife's credit information to establish residency here while claiming to live in Riverside City for tax purposes. That's fraud. You've also been diverting funds from joint accounts without her knowledge or consent. That's theft. Detective Hartwell consulted her notes. We've also received reports that you've been planning to sell property without the co-owner's knowledge or consent. That's attempted real estate fraud. Trevor looked around the room desperately. Sarah, please, we can work this out. I made mistakes, but we can fix this. Fix what, exactly? The lies? The theft? The betrayal? The 2 years of my life you stole? That's when we heard another car in the driveway. Through the window, I watched Autumn's white Honda Civic pull up. She'd apparently cut her yoga class short. Trevor saw her too and went even paler. Oh, God. Perfect timing, I said with a smile. Autumn bounced up the front steps, keys jangling, calling out cheerfully, Babe, I forgot my water bottle for class. I'll just grab it and... She stopped dead when she opened the door and saw our crowd of people in her boyfriend's kitchen. Trevor? Her voice was small and confused. What's going on? Who are all these people? I stepped forward with my sweetest smile. Hi, Autumn. We meet again. Though I wasn't completely honest when we met the first time. She looked at me with growing alarm. I'm sorry, do I know you? Oh, honey. I pulled out my driver's license. I'm Sarah Mason. This is my house. Trevor is my husband, and you've been living in my home, sleeping in my bed, and making money off my property for over 2 years. Autumn's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, disbelief, horror, and finally betrayal as she turned to Trevor. Your husband? Trevor, you said you were divorced. You said this was your house. You said... Her voice broke. Autumn, I can explain. Trevor started, but she cut him off. Explain what? That you lied to me about everything? That you're married? That I've been the other woman this whole time? She turned to me, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry. I had no idea. He told me he was divorced, that his ex-wife had given up her claim to the house. He said they'd separated 2 years ago, and she'd moved away.
Fascinating story, Natasha interjected. Too bad it's completely fabricated. Detective Hartwell stepped closer to Trevor. Sir, I need you to come down to the station to answer some questions about these fraud allegations. Am I under arrest? Not yet, but I strongly recommend you cooperate fully with our investigation. Autumn was staring at Trevor like she'd never seen him before. 2.5 years, Trevor. You've been lying to me for 2.5 years? Autumn, please, I love you. You don't love me, she screamed. You love yourself. You used me, just like you used her. She gestured wildly at me. Riley stepped forward protectively. I think everyone needs to calm down. No, I said firmly. I think everyone needs to hear the truth. All of it. I pulled out my phone and began reading from Trevor's own emails. Figure out how to break it to Sarah gently? She's too trusting to suspect anything? Once I get the house sold, we can disappear and start fresh? With each quote, Autumn's face grew more horrified, and Trevor grew more desperate. You were planning to sell my house and run away with her? I continued reading. Sarah will never know what hit her. She's been so busy feeling sorry for herself that she hasn't been paying attention to what's really happening. The room fell silent except for Autumn's quiet sobbing. Detective Hartwell closed her notebook. I think I've heard enough. Mr. Mason, you need to come with me. Now. As Trevor was led outside in handcuffs for questioning, Autumn collapsed onto my couch, still crying. "I'm so sorry," she kept repeating. "I'm so sorry. I thought I was in love. I thought he loved me. I had no idea you existed." I sat down across from her. "Autumn, you were a victim too. He lied to both of us." She looked up at me with red, puffy eyes. "How are you being so nice to me? I lived in your house. I slept in your bed. I posted pictures like it was mine." "Because you didn't know," I said simply. "But now you do, and now you have a choice about what kind of person you want to be going forward." Natasha cleared her throat. "Speaking of going forward, Autumn, you'll need to find alternative housing immediately. This property belongs to Sarah." Autumn nodded miserably. "Of course, I'll pack my things today." As she gathered her belongings, I watched her carefully place my silk robe on the bed and set my coffee mug on the kitchen counter. "For what it's worth," she said as she carried her suitcases to her car, "he never deserved you. I can see that now." After everyone left, I stood alone in my house for the first time in over 2 years. It felt different now, not like a crime scene or a monument to betrayal, but like a space that could be reclaimed. My phone buzzed with a text from Natasha. "Phase 3 complete. Now comes the fun part, making him pay for everything he's stolen from you." I smiled as I walked through each room, already planning how I'd redecorate once Trevor's belongings were removed. He'd given me the perfect gift, really. He'd shown me exactly who he was, and exactly how strong I could be when pushed to my limit. Now it was time to show him what consequences looked like. 3 days after Trevor's arrest, the story exploded across Maplewood Heights like wildfire. The local newspaper, the Heights Herald, ran it as their front-page story. "Local man arrested for defrauding wife while living double life." But that was just the beginning. Cameron called me Tuesday morning with news that made my coffee taste sweeter. "Sarah, you need to see this. Autumn's Instagram account has gone viral, but not in the way she planned." Apparently, when loyal followers started questioning why she'd suddenly stopped posting from her beautiful home, some internet detectives had pieced together the truth. Screenshots of her old posts were being shared everywhere with captions like, "Influencer built career on stolen house," and "The real story behind those perfect Instagram photos." Her follower count had dropped from 15,000 to 3,000 overnight. The yoga studio where she worked had quietly asked her to take a leave of absence after clients started canceling classes. The brands that had paid her for sponsored content were demanding refunds and threatening legal action for misrepresentation. "It gets better," Cameron continued. "Remember those automatic transfers you set up from Trevor's account? Turns out he'd been hiding money from you for years. We found 3 separate accounts, including one offshore account in the Cayman Islands with over $200,000.
The criminal charges were more serious than I'd initially realized. Detective Hartwell had uncovered a pattern of fraud going back to the beginning of our marriage. Trevor had been slowly siphoning money from our shared accounts, creating false tax documents, and even taking out a second mortgage on our house without my knowledge, using forged signatures. The district attorney is treating this as a major financial fraud case, Natasha explained during our meeting Wednesday afternoon. "We're talking about potential federal charges for mail fraud, wire fraud, and identity theft. If convicted on all counts, he could face 15 to 20 years in prison." 20 years? I felt a mixture of satisfaction and shock. "Sarah, this wasn't just adultery or even simple theft. This was a sophisticated, long-term fraud scheme. He created false documents, established fraudulent business addresses, and systematically stole from you while psychologically manipulating you into believing you were the problem. The courts don't take kindly to this level of premeditation." The psychological manipulation part had become clearer through therapy sessions I'd started with Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a specialist in financial abuse and gaslighting. She helped me understand how Trevor's lies had been carefully constructed to make me doubt my own instincts. "When you started questioning his behavior, what did he do?" Dr. Walsh asked during our second session. He made me feel like I was being paranoid or needy. He'd say things like, "I thought you trusted me," or "Why are you being so suspicious?" He made me feel guilty for missing him. Classic gaslighting technique. He trained you to stop asking questions by making you feel bad about having legitimate concerns. This isn't just about money. It's about psychological control. Meanwhile, Trevor's legal troubles were multiplying. His arrest had triggered an investigation by the IRS, who discovered he'd been filing false tax returns, claiming residence in Riverside City to avoid certain state taxes. The fake business address had also been used to claim business deductions for travel expenses between his supposed work and home, expenses that didn't exist since he never actually worked in Riverside. His real employer in Clearwater, yes, he'd been working just 20 minutes from our house the entire time, had fired him immediately upon learning about the arrest. Apparently, he'd been using sick days and personal time to maintain the lie, claiming he needed to visit his wife when he was actually just going home to the house he lived in every day. The most shocking discovery came when Cameron traced Trevor's actual daily movements over the past 6 months, using credit card records, security camera footage, and cell phone data. He'd mapped out Trevor's routine. "Your husband has been living a completely fabricated life," Cameron reported. Every morning, he'd leave the house at 8 a.m. and drive to Clearwater for work. But he told Autumn he was commuting to Riverside City. Then he'd call you from the office, pretending he was 3 hours away. After work, he'd sometimes drive around for hours, sending you texts about traffic or working late to maintain the illusion that he was far away. So when he couldn't visit me on weekends, he was spending those weekends with Autumn at your house, telling her he was too tired from the long drive from Riverside to go anywhere. The web of lies was so extensive that even I was impressed by the sheer amount of energy Trevor had put into maintaining it. He created false conference calls, fictitious business trips, and elaborate stories about coworkers who didn't exist. He even gone so far as to have mail forwarded from the UPS store in Riverside to our house, then hide it from Autumn to maintain the illusion that he lived there part-time. But perhaps the most infuriating discovery was the evidence of how he'd been portraying me to Autumn and his few remaining friends. Cameron had obtained text messages between Trevor and his college buddy Marcus. Wait, I couldn't use that name. Let me call him Chake, where Trevor described me as clingy, unstable, and financially irresponsible. In one particularly galling exchange, Trevor had written, "Sarah just doesn't understand that I need space to grow as a person. She's always been dependent on me for everything. I think the separation is actually good for her. Maybe she'll learn to be more independent." This while I was working full-time, paying all the bills, and living on my sister's couch so he could play house with his girlfriend. The financial devastation Trevor had caused became clear as Natasha's team conducted a full audit of our assets. The second mortgage he'd taken out had been used to fund his lifestyle with Autumn. Vacations, expensive dinners, the engagement ring, even a lease on a luxury car that was parked in a garage across the town so I wouldn't see it during my rare visits to the house. The total amount he stole from you, including opportunity costs and interest, is approximately $347,000, Natasha informed me during our Thursday meeting. That includes the diverted funds, the secret mortgage, the hidden accounts, and the money he spent on maintaining his double life.
Nearly $300,000, more than twice my annual salary, stolen over the course of our marriage. But the financial crimes weren't Trevor's only legal problem. The investigation had revealed that he'd also committed perjury on multiple documents, including loan applications where he'd lied about his marital status and residence. He'd claimed to be single on some forms and married on others, depending on which status would get him better terms. The IRS had also discovered that Trevor had been claiming me as a dependent on his tax returns, while simultaneously filing documents claiming he supported no one. He'd been getting tax benefits for having a wife while telling loan officers he was single. It's like he treated life as a multiple choice test where he could pick whichever answer benefited him most, Natasha observed. By Friday, just 1 week after the confrontation, Trevor's carefully constructed world had completely collapsed. His employer had not only fired him,
but was considering pressing charges for time theft and misuse of company resources. His parents, who had initially rushed to defend their son, had gone silent after learning the full extent of his lies. Even his own lawyer had suggested he consider a plea deal rather than risk trial. The media attention had spread beyond our small town. A blogger who specialized in financial fraud had picked up the story, and it was being shared across social media as a cautionary tale about financial abuse in marriage. Comments range from supportive messages for me to absolute disbelief at the complexity of Trevor's deception. "I can't believe he maintained this lie for 2.5 years," one commenter wrote. "The amount of planning and energy it must have taken to orchestrate this level of fraud is staggering." Another comment that particularly resonated with me: "This woman is a hero. She didn't just catch a cheating husband, she exposed a criminal enterprise." But perhaps the most satisfying consequence was the complete destruction of the fantasy life Trevor had built with Autumn. She'd been forced to move back in with her parents in another state, her influencer career in ruins, her yoga certification under review due to the moral character clauses in her contract. I'd heard through Riley, who'd stayed in touch with some mutual acquaintances, that Autumn had posted one final Instagram story before deleting her account entirely. Sometimes we discovered that the life we thought we were living was built on someone else's foundation. I'm sorry to everyone I hurt unknowingly. I'm taking time to rebuild myself honestly this time. She'd lost her home, her career, her relationship, and her reputation, all because she trusted a man who was incapable of telling the truth about anything. Trevor's preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following month. Natasha expected him to take a plea deal rather than face the overwhelming evidence against him. Either way, his days of manipulation and fraud were over. As I sat in my house on Friday evening, surrounded by the belongings I'd slowly been moving back from Riley's apartment, I reflected on how quickly justice had moved once the truth came to light. Trevor had spent years building his house of lies, and it had taken less than 2 weeks for it to completely collapse. The best part? I was just getting started. The criminal case was only the beginning of Trevor's consequences. The civil suit, the divorce settlement, and the complete reconstruction of my life were still to come. He'd stolen years from me, but he'd also given me something valuable: the knowledge of exactly how strong I could be when I stopped making excuses for someone else's cruelty. Now it was time to show him what a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to gain could accomplish. 18 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my completely renovated home, watching the sunrise through windows that Trevor never seen. The house looked nothing like it had during his deception. I'd torn out every trace of the life he built with Autumn and created something entirely my own. The final divorce decree had been signed 6 months ago. Trevor, facing 23 criminal charges and the prospect of decades in federal prison, had agreed to a plea deal that gave me everything: the house, all marital assets, full restitution for the stolen money, plus punitive damages that totaled over $500,000. His lawyer had advised him to fighting would only result in a longer prison sentence and complete financial ruin. He was currently serving 8 years in federal prison with the possibility of additional state charges when he was released. The offshore accounts had been seized and returned to me, along with every penny he'd hidden over the years. The IRS had imposed additional penalties and interest that ensured Trevor would be financially devastated for the rest of his life. But the money, satisfying as it was, wasn't the real victory. The real victory was the woman I'd become. I used part of the settlement to launch my own interior design consulting firm, specializing in helping women rebuild their homes after major life transitions. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd learned to transform spaces by transforming my own life. Business was booming, with a 6-month waiting list and inquiries from 3 different states.
My story had become something of a legend in certain circles. Forbes had featured me in an article about financial empowerment after abuse. A true crime podcast had done a 3-part series on Trevor's fraud scheme, calling it one of the most sophisticated cases of marital deception in recent memory.
I'd been invited to speak at women's conferences about recognizing financial abuse and trusting your instincts. But the most meaningful recognition had come from unexpected sources. I'd received hundreds of emails from women who'd heard my story and recognized their own situations. Some were still trapped in similar circumstances. Others had found the courage to investigate their own suspicions. One letter particularly stayed with me, from a woman named Rebecca in Oregon. I read about your story online and realized my husband has been lying about business trips. I hired a private investigator and discovered he's been living with another woman in the next city over for 3 years. I never would have had the courage to look if I hadn't heard what you went through. Thank you for showing me that I'm not crazy for trusting my gut. Dr. Walsh had helped me understand that surviving Trevor's betrayal wasn't just about recovering what he'd stolen. It was about reclaiming my sense of reality and self-worth. The gaslighting had been so extensive that I'd begun to doubt my own perceptions about everything. Learning to trust myself again had been the hardest part of healing. You've transformed from a woman who was trained to doubt herself into someone who trusts her instincts completely, Dr. Walsh observed during one of our final sessions. That's not just recovery, that's evolution. The house itself had become a symbol of that evolution. I'd gutted the master bedroom entirely, creating a sanctuary with floor-to-ceiling windows and a reading nook where I spent Sunday mornings with coffee and design magazines. The kitchen, where I'd once found evidence of Trevor's lies, was now the heart of dinner parties with friends who'd supported me through the worst period of my life. Riley had moved in temporarily while she saved for her own place, and having family around had healed something in me I hadn't realized was broken. We'd created new traditions, new memories, new laughter, in rooms that had once echoed with deception. The garden, which Autumn had maintained for her Instagram photos, had been completely redesigned. I'd planted vegetables and herbs, practical plants that nourished rather than just looking pretty for social media. There was something deeply satisfying about growing real things in soil that had once been used for fake purposes. Last month, I'd received an unexpected visitor. Autumn had called and asked if she could come by to return something she'd found while cleaning out her storage unit. I was hesitant, but curiosity won. She looked different when she arrived, older, more serious, without the bright-eyed optimism that had once made her seem so young. She handed me a small box containing jewelry I hadn't even realized was missing. She said, "I found these mixed in with my things. I think they might be family pieces." They were, my grandmother's pearls and a ring that had belonged to my great-aunt. Trevor must have hidden them away, perhaps planning to give them to Autumn later. "Thank you for returning these," I said, genuinely touched. "I owe you so much more than jewelry," she replied. "I've been in therapy for over a year trying to understand how I let myself be so completely deceived. My therapist says I need to make amends to the people I hurt, even if I didn't know I was hurting them at the time." We talked for nearly 2 hours. Autumn had moved back to her hometown in Nebraska, where she was working as a teacher and slowly rebuilding her life away from social media. She'd realized that her entire adult identity had been built around external validation and the lifestyle Trevor had provided. She said, "I thought I was living this perfect life, beautiful house, successful boyfriend, social media following, but none of it was real. I was living in someone else's reality, and when it collapsed, I had no idea who I actually was." She asked if I could ever forgive her, and I'd surprise myself by saying yes. Not because what she'd done was okay, but because holding on to anger was exhausting, and she'd been manipulated too. Trevor had been the architect of everyone's pain. As spring turned to summer, I found myself in a relationship with David Chen, a contractor I'd met while renovating the house. He was nothing like Trevor, straightforward, honest to a fault, and refreshingly uncomplicated. When he said he'd be somewhere at a certain time, he was there. When he made a promise, he kept it. Simple concepts that had become revolutionary after years of Trevor's elaborate deceptions. I don't understand how someone could lie about their entire life. The amount of energy it would take to keep track of all those lies, why not just use that energy to actually build something real? David said. That was exactly the question I'd been asking myself. Trevor had put more effort into creating his fake life than most people put into building genuine success. If he channeled that creativity and planning into legitimate endeavors, he could have achieved anything he wanted. The business was thriving beyond my wildest expectations. I'd hired 2 associate designers and was considering opening a second location. More importantly, I loved the work. Helping other women transform their spaces after divorces, deaths, or major life changes felt like a calling rather than just a career. One client, Margaret, had hired me after discovering her husband's gambling addiction had cost them their home. As we worked together to design her new apartment, she told me, "You understand what it's like to rebuild from nothing. That's why I trust you to help me create something beautiful." That trust, earned through shared experience of betrayal and recovery, was worth more than any professional recognition. The final legal victory had come just last week. Trevor's appeals had been denied, and all his assets had been officially transferred to me. His parents, who had initially blamed me for destroying his son's life, had eventually apologized after learning the full extent of his crimes. His father had even offered to help pay additional restitution, though I'd declined. Trevor made his choices, I'd told them. He's responsible for the consequences, not you. As I prepared for another day of client meetings and design consultations, I reflected on how completely my life had changed. 2 years ago, I'd been sleeping on my sister's couch, eating ramen noodles, and making excuses for a husband who was systematically betraying me. Today, I owned my own successful business, lived in a beautiful home that was entirely mine, and I'd learned to trust my instincts completely. The woman who had knocked on her own door and played dumb when Trevor's mistress answered seemed like a different person entirely. Not because I'd become someone new, but because I'd finally become who I was meant to be all along. Someone who refused to accept lies as truth, who demanded honesty in relationships, and who understood her own worth. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "Dinner tonight? I'm cooking." Simple, direct, honest. Everything Trevor had never been. I smiled as I typed back. "Perfect. I'll bring wine." As I locked the door of my beautiful, honest, Trevor-free home and walked to my car, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete peace with my choices and absolute confidence in my future. Trevor thought he was playing a game where he held all the cards, but he'd forgotten one crucial detail. The game only worked as long as I didn't know I was playing. Once I learned the rules, I didn't just win, I rewrote the entire game. And this time, I was the only player who mattered.